right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Fabian Girmay, and I'm a training coordinator with ARTH, African Americans Reach and Teach Health. I'm so glad you could join us today for another one of our soulful cooking classes. At ARTH, we focus on promoting positive health outcomes in our communities by providing culturally responsive health education, resources, and programs that support older adults and caregivers. And what better way to do that than by bringing people together through food, culture, and conversation. We're thrilled once again to have Chef Adunni with us today. She's a trained chef and food scientist and the creator of Taste Tutor, where she highlights cuisines from Africa and the diaspora, teaching about the influences and connections of the Black food experience around the world. Through Taste Tutor, she shares the art, science, nutrition, and culture of food while helping people build amazing flavors. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Chef Adunni, who'll be guiding us through today's delicious recipe, Suya Spiced Lamb and Veggies. Chef, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi everyone. My name is Adunni and I am the chef and owner of Taste Tutor. Today I'm going to be talking through the recipe, which is Suya Spiced Lamb with veggies. I'm also going to be highlighting GLP-1. So I'll explain what that is before I start cooking. GLP-1 is a naturally occurring hormone in your body that happens when you're eating fiber and protein rich foods. And it basically is what helps keep you fuller longer. So I know you've heard protein and fiber help keep you fuller longer. So GLP-1 is that hormone that is doing that for you. So because people have had type 2 diabetes, there are a series of drugs out. They've been out for a while that were developed to help people with type 2 diabetes to manage that as an aid to what your body is naturally doing. So, one of the side effects, I guess, the good side effects of that drug is weight loss. And essentially, that's happening because you are fuller longer, and that drug is helping boost that. So, you're not going to eat as many calories, so you're just going to lose more weight. And so now people are being prescribed that because it helps with weight loss, and everybody wants to be skinny. But there are ways to promote that in your body naturally. So today I'm going to show you a recipe high in protein, very low in carb, and high in vegetables, which have fiber and a lot of other nutrients and antioxidants. So let's get started. If anyone's heard of GLP-1 drugs like semaglutide or tirzepatide, like Ozempic or Wegovy, that's what that is. So that's what the drug is helping you do, and I'm going to show you how to try to do it naturally. Obviously, paired with diet and exercise, those drugs help with weight loss. But if you can manage it in your lifestyle, you can also do it naturally. So we're going to start by prepping our meats because we want that to marinate for a little bit before we start roasting our vegetables. So I'm going to move all this out of the way and I'll go through each vegetable as we're prepping them. And I've got a separate cutting board here just for purposes of not cross-contaminating the meat with the vegetables. So make sure it's good with you. Okay, so I've got some lamb here, and these are just, I believe, lamb chops, but not like the ones you're used to with the little bone. So what I like to do is just cut out the fat because that lean protein is what's important for helping maintain fullness. The fat is just going to add more calories that aren't necessarily as nutrient dense as like a protein or a fiber. So for the purpose of this demo, I'm just going to cut out most of the fat. Now, if you were doing this recipe and you weren't necessarily concerned about the fat, I would keep it in because it does add nice texture and additional flavor. But for today, we're trying to be healthy. And this hopefully should come together for you within like maybe an hour and a half. So if you've got time at home during the week, this is geared toward that time. So for suya, we generally like to work with very thin slices and we like to cut against the grain. So if you see the grain for this piece is going this way, so we're going to want to cut like this. And when we do that, we're getting shorter fibers, so we'll have more tender meat. So I'm literally cutting as thin as possible because we want this to cook really quickly as well. Okay. This also works with things like chicken, if that's your jam, or shrimp, any protein that you would like that's a little more healthy. Work. So we'll go ahead and add back our meat to our bowl here. And Arth should have the recipe to share with you so that you can get all the measurements and things. I'm gonna move my cutting board with all the meat on it. Okay, so now that we've cleaned our knife from all the meat juices, we're gonna go ahead and start prepping the vegetables, which is the more time consuming portion of this. Okay, so we got our meat here and we're just gonna add some suya seasoning. This is one that I make that's available online, but they do sell suya seasoning online at other places. And if you visit one of the West African markets around town, I know there's one on Rainier, and then there's one on, well, there's a couple here in Kent, and there are a few other places as well. You could get a similar seasoning. It does include a lot of unique spices, so things like uda, which is grains of salim, and it looks kind of like black pepper in a long pod. Let me see if I can show you. So this is what it looks like. That's one of the spices in it. There's also ginger. There's a crunchy peanut that's sometimes used as a snack, but sometimes used as a portion of the seasoning, which let me show you what that looks like. And that snack is called kuli kuli. Um, and it should be made with just peanuts. So it's ground up peanuts into a paste and then shaped and fried. So that's what it looks like. And it's ground up in there as well. Um, in this particular seasoning, there's some chicken bouillon to help with some umami or savoriness flavors. So all we're gonna do is let it sit and don't be shy with the seasoning because you want it to coat and permeate the meat. It is really spicy, so if spicy is not your thing, you can also um, sub this out for something like a blackening seasoning that'll give you kind of the same effect, but a vastly different flavor profile. So, and that's also more readily available at the grocery store. Okay, so we're gonna set this aside and work on our veggies. So for veggies, we've got a lot. And this assortment of veggies is just things that I particularly enjoy. But for this recipe, you can use whatever veggies you like that roast well, which is most veggies. And veggies who that don't have quite as much water. So lots of root veggies, brassicas, things like broccoli or Brussels sprouts, um, onions. Today I'm using a shallot. Beets, I had to grow into liking beets, but I'm at an age now where for some reason I like them all of a sudden. So we're going to use beets, peppers, carrots. I've got butternut squash here and acorn squash. And because it's only a little bit that I'm making today, I've cut them into a third here and then half, just so I could show you how to process them. And then I've got rosemary from the garden. That's going to help with the suya as well as adding some aromatics to the roasted veggies. Okay, so let's start with the peppers first because those are the easiest, and we're going to end with the beets because it's going to stain everything. So we'll set this aside. Let me put on some more gloves. And you don't have to use gloves, you could just use clean hands, but it's easier for me to transition between things using gloves for the demo. Okay, so we're going to start with the peppers. And if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. So we'll start with the peppers. And what I like to do, I've just cut this into a quarter. But what I like to do is use my knife to slide out all of the membrane and the seeds. And I'm at a season now where I'm starting to grow things. So if you're one of those people who does garden, these seeds you can try to plant in a little bit of soil and see if they grow. And you might get some bell peppers in a few months. I don't know. Who knows? Um, so we'll do the same thing for the yellow pepper. And these things are also things you could do if you buy groceries at a certain point in the week and you just want to prep all of them. You can prep them and cut them and put them in the fridge so they're ready to put into a meal without having to take the time during the week to do that if you happen to be working or you have classes or something that you're doing, volunteer work, anything like that, that you don't necessarily have as much time. So I just cut those into chunks. And ideally, we'll cut things into similar sizes so that they roast evenly. And I'm going to place everything in different sections on my baking sheet that's lined with parchment paper. Because if something cooks faster than something else, I want to be able to pull it off before the other thing. So we're just going to put our peppers on here in sections. Okay. Let's move on to, let's do the Brussels sprouts because they're the next easiest and not as messy. So what I like to do with these is pull off all of the like leaves on the outer leaves if they look a little janky. Otherwise, they're perfectly fine. So there we go. And for these, I just like to slice them in half because they're small enough that they don't necessarily need to be sliced any smaller. I love these little cutesy ones. Okay, and I like to put them cut side down on the cookie sheet because I want to make sure that there's a nice char on both sides because that adds a lot of flavor to your roasted vegetables. I forgot to cut this one. Okay. Next, we're gonna do the carrot, and I like to just peel the carrots. So this is my favorite vegetable peeler, and I got it from one of my parents' neighbors. I don't know if you guys know about or remember Cutco. Um, one of the neighbor kids was selling it while he was in college, and I bought something from him, which actually happened to, I still use today, like the scissors, that cutting board I was using before, but it's a really good product, but it's just funny the whole salesman pitch that he gave us. So I like to cut my carrots into thirds so I can make strips, and then I cut them in half. like that. And then for each one, I'm probably just going to cut it into a third just based on the size. This one I'll do in half. Based on the size of this carrot. All right, and we'll set that on our baking sheet as well. Okay, what's next? Let's do the shallot since that's also not as messy. So I just have to cut off the ends of either side. It's similar to how you would do an onion. Sometimes the shallots have two sides to them, so I don't necessarily cut them in half right away. I try to just get that first layer off. And I do the same thing with onions. I always peel off that first layer just because it makes it easier and cleaner to work with it. Because sometimes there could be blemishes on that first layer since it's the closest to the soil and the surface, you know, when it grows. So there are two in here, or two sides it looks like. So I'm just going to cut it kind of in half. Okay, I did pretty good. And then just cut this in half again. And we'll do it like this because I want these to be more substantial. Okay, next let's do the butternut squash. So that's this one. And for this one, I am going to save these seeds because I wanted to start some butternut squash this year to see if I could finally grow a squash or a melon. I've been trying for like 6 years. Um, so I'm just going to scoop out the seeds using a spoon. Can everybody see what I'm doing? And I'm going to set these aside because I'm going to use them later. Okay, so I'm trying my best to get all the fibers out too. It's okay if they're in there, but just looks weird to me. So just use this spoon to scrape it out. Okay. Now, if I were working with the whole butternut squash, I would cut it in half and then start to peel it. So I'll just give you an example of what that would look like. In the safest way possible, if you had the whole butternut squash, you would take your knife and just run it down the edge to try to get the skin off. Now, this is a lot safer if it is a whole butternut squash because there's more of a base for you to work with. Um, but for today, this is what we're doing. So I'm just going to use this little bit here. So let me cut that in half. And then you can wrap the rest of your butternut squash in plastic wrap and just save it for later. It lasts a pretty long time, but I would say, use it as quickly as you can. You can even roast off the whole thing and then spread the pieces onto a baking sheet and freeze that, and then put those in an individual, like in a Ziploc bag. So then you can use that cooked butternut squash in soups or just as a quick vegetable side or something like that. So I've got it all cut up. We'll just add that to our pan as well. Let me show you what the pan looks like so far. It's so pretty. All the colors, and all the colors are going to give you different benefits, and there are different antioxidants in each one. That is why I was intentional about choosing these vegetables because you, I don't know if you've heard the phrase, you want to eat the rainbow, but that's beneficial because you're getting a bunch of different nutrients. So next, we're going to do the acorn squash, which this one is a little easier because I'm not going to peel this one. It also looks really nice on the pan. So do the same thing. Once you cut it in half, just scoop out all of the seeds. And again, I'm going to save these ones to try to grow one of these. Okay. All right. So then all you got to do is, let's see, I want it to look pretty. So let me just cut a section. And then I'm going to cut along the width of the acorn squash. I think that should be enough to fit on this pan. Okay. Um, so they're nice and flat pieces, and we'll put that on the pan as well. Okay. So last, we're going to work on the beets. So I've got this beetroot here. Sometimes it comes with the greens, and you can also save these greens and eat them. So all you would do is cut off about like a half inch from the bottom part, and then you'll just want to saute them like you would kale or something like that. So you start by sauteing the stems first because they're a little tougher, and then once those are soft, you would add in the greens, and you could do it with some all-purpose seasoning, garlic, a little bit of oil, and pretty much whatever seasoning you want. So that's another vegetable that we can work with. Actually, if we have time, maybe I'll just do that with the lamb because then it'll soak up all the flavor of that residual lamb in the pan. So for the beetroot, just cut off both ends. That's what I like to do. And I'm going to use my handy dandy peeler again to just peel around the edges. Just to get that outer portion off because this is the part again that is, it does have a lot of nutrients, but it is closest to the soil. So it tastes the most like dirt. I think that's what beets taste like. But for some reason, it's good. Well, I guess what I imagine dirt would taste like because I've never tasted dirt before. So for this, I just like to cut it into relatively medium thickness slices. I think that should be enough. And then I like to quarter it just so we have some different shapes. And you see how nice the little rings are on there. So we'll put that on the pan as well. Go ahead and add these pieces. Okay. Now, let me go ahead and cut up these beet greens in case I decide to use them later. So just chop like that, and then we can roughly chop that part. Set that aside. All right. So ideally, you would try to clean this up as quickly as possible because beets can stain. And that is one benefit of using the gloves so that your fingers and your hands don't get stained, but you don't have to. It'll come off eventually. All right, so now we've got our pan of veggies and we're going to, let me set this down. Okay. We're going to then add our oil and our all-purpose seasoning. I'm using seasoning 101, which is another seasoning that I make. There's also a version called smoked 101, which is like a smoked all-purpose seasoning. It has smoked salt in it. This one, also available on the website, but you can use whatever seasoning you want. One thing to note with the recipe that Arthur is going to share with you versus using the seasonings on the site versus store-bought seasonings, you want to cut the amount in half because the store-bought ones have more salt in them. So you don't want to overpower the food with salt in that regard. So I'm just going to sprinkle some oil over the top of the veggies. Try to get just a little bit because it's gonna spread out in the oven. You don't have to like do too much. And then I'm going to season the whole pan with just that all-purpose seasoning. So what I usually do in terms of this particular seasoning, which is the seasoning 101, and roasting vegetables is for every pound of vegetables, you'll want to use 1 tablespoon of the seasoning. And that's because the seasoning is mostly onion and garlic, and then there's black pepper and sea salt. So you want to get that flavor all up and through there. Okay, so I think that's good. And we're gonna go ahead and put this in the oven and start working on our meat. Oh, I forgot to put a little bit of rosemary on here for aromatics. Don't forget that part. So I just do a few sprigs, kind of just throughout. Okay, so now let's move on to doing the lamb. Okay, so for the lamb, it's been sitting for what has been like 20 minutes. That should be enough time. We got the lamb here, and we're gonna turn our cast iron pan on. You can use a stainless steel pan, anything that works well with high heat. Go ahead and turn that on to medium high and let it heat up before you add your oil in there. And I'm probably going to, once I add the oil and the suya meat, I'm going to probably mute so that I can turn the vent fan on because you want to make sure that you have plenty of ventilation when you're making this because of all the spices coating the meat, as well as just all of the smokiness and everything in the air. This is traditionally made outdoors on an open fire. I usually like to grill it, but if we're not doing that and we're doing that indoors, pan searing it is fine. You can also air fry it, which takes a little bit longer, but I like the pan searing because it gets that nice crust on both sides of the meat. Yeah. So you we can add the oil. Okay, that should be enough. And you're trying to work with as little fat in these cases as possible because we're wanting this to be a little bit healthier than like a traditional meal. We're wanting to promote the fiber in the vegetables and the protein in the meat and not necessarily add too many additional calories. Because fat per gram has more calories than both protein and carbs and and alcohol. So just keep that in mind. So we'll let that heat up and you can see it starting to bubble up a little bit and you want to get it just before it starts to smoke and that's when it's time to add your meat. So at this point, I'm going to put the video on mute while I do that part. Well, at least let me start it and then I'll put it on mute. Okay, so we'll take one piece at a time. and just start to lay it in your pan. And we're ideally only going to flip these one time, and they should be about a minute per side, if that, because lamb doesn't need to cook all the way to 165, and we want it to remain tender and not tough. But we should be successful because we've cut it so thin, as well as because it doesn't need to cook as long, and because we've cut it against the grain. So we should have a good tender piece of meat. Now I'm gonna be okay. So the meat at this point is done. So I've turned the heat off, and I'm gonna move it away from that burner. We'll go ahead and set the meat aside because I want to go ahead and try to saute these beet greens, which is not in the recipe, but it's literally just adding it to the pan that's already got the flavor. So if you happen to have beets with greens, you could just do this part as an extra. Okay. So we've got all of the bits in here. In French, it's called fond, but I just like to call them flavor bits. There's a little bit of oil, so I'm not even going to add any more. Turn the heat back on to like medium, and we will add in our, oops, I've already mixed in the leaves, but add in your stem as best as you can and let those saute a little bit to try to pick up all that flavor on the bottom of the pan. Um, and if you notice, I did switch my tool after the meat was done because one thing to help to prevent cross contamination is switching your tool because that first pair of tongs was working with the raw meat. And then we don't want to use that same pair of tongs to then pull the cooked meat off of the pan. So that's why I switched here. And this will just be easier for dishing everything out in the end. Okay, so I'm gonna let that cook down a little bit. I am gonna add a little more seasoning because we like seasoning over here. I'm gonna mute it again so I could turn the vent fan on. All right, so we've got our beet greens a little wilted, and I'll just explain what I did there. I just added a little bit of water at each step to help hasten the process of everything cooking down. So that's what you saw me doing after I added the seasoning. So now we've got all of our components ready to go. I'm gonna pull the vegetables out of the oven and then we can plate and enjoy. Okay, my workstation here. And I didn't show you this, but I had a damp towel underneath the cutting board, and that helps to keep the cutting board in place so that you're not slipping and sliding everywhere while you're cutting. And that helps to keep everything safe. Okay, put all of our items out so we're ready to serve. Got our beet greens. We've got our meat, and this is just a single serving of the meat. So the recipe calls for quite a bit more. And then pull our vegetables out of the oven. And these are our veggies. They're all nice and roasted. Got some char on the Brussels sprouts. These are going to be so good. Okay. All right. So to plate, all we're going to do is take a bunch of everything and put it on our plate and enjoy. So we're going to start with our fiber-rich veggies with some carrots and some acorn squash, butternut squash, some of the beet, and some of the shallots. And you can see some of that char on the bottom of the Brussels sprouts as well. And pepper. And a little more acorn squash. All right. And then now we can add our protein, which in this case is lamb. Okay. And then let's put the beet greens off to the side. And traditionally, suya is eaten with like raw red onion and maybe a little tomato, but not really. Mostly raw red onion. I just like it with tomato. But then you also add a little bit of extra seasoning at the end, just for color and then just extra flavor. And there you have your suya spiced lamb with veggies. Do we have any questions or anything in the chat?
That looks amazing. I'm over here just my mouth is watering, so I can't wait to try this recipe.
I hope it turns out well. It's pretty simple to come together, so hopefully you guys enjoy this one and try it at home. And again, you can use other seasoning blends. You don't have to use suya for this, but this is just a West African seasoning blend that I like to use in a lot of things. But again, you could use blackening seasoning. You could use a little bit of Cajun seasoning. You can mix your own kind of thing. You could do Italian with some all-purpose, whatever flavors you want, you can do with this. That's all I have for you. And if there are any topics or dishes you would like to see made, please let Arth know so that I can go ahead and prep those demos for you because this is really fun for me and coming up with new recipes based on what you all want to learn is really exciting. So I'd love to get your feedback.
Thank you so much, Chef Adunni, for sharing your expertise and teaching us about Suya Spiced Lamb and Veggies. It looked amazing. It looks amazing. We really appreciate you being here with us. And everyone, you can learn more about her work at thetastetutor.com. And be sure to follow her on Instagram as well for free recipes, tips, and inspiration. Before we go, I want to remind everyone that we have several exciting events coming up in April. I will put all the information in the chat for you guys, so please check it out and join us for our upcoming programs. I'll also put the website for Chef Aduni as well, so that way you have the link right there. Thank you all for joining us today. Have a wonderful Saturday. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.